Hello, and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Devine. Today I'm joined by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Morning, Joe.
Hello. And Alex Stewart.
Morning.
Yeah, and hopefully, we've tried to get the framing right. You can probably see piles of books everywhere because we don't have any tripods, and all of our cameras and phones are balanced on what looks like decades of knowledge.
You know what? It looks like an affectation. It's genuinely necessary.
Doesn't it? Yeah. It's not like one of those faux pubs that tries to appear old.
It
really is old.
And, this is actually how it is.
Most of these books have been read as well.
Sure. Not like the ones in my house.
Not like the ones in my house.
Yeah,
but
sure.
The ones in my office, yes.
Lovely. Okay, well, we are here today to talk about Watford, which is going to be quite fun. I must admit, before we get started today, that I knew shamefully little about Watford before we started researching for today's podcast, and there's quite a lot of particularly regarding owners, the Pozzos, there's quite a lot of funny stuff. So for the first few moments, I hope that learned Watford fans will bear with us for the three of us, and also for any listeners who maybe aren't so au fait with the Pozzos. I'm just going to briefly read through a list of things that I learned yesterday about the Pozzos. I cannot believe that Tifo has not made a video about this. Something perhaps we should rectify in the future. I'm also going to have to try and avoid potentially libelous stuff that I might have written down as I'm reading. So it might sound a bit
We'll
wobbly.
have a signal in the background that one of Alex or I will make if you encroach on something.
Just start screaming if I say something illegal. Okay. The Pozzos, they owned 3 clubs until 2016 when they sold Granada, which was their Spanish arm of the sort of triangle of clubs. In 2018, there was a criminal investigation which took place in Spain and Italy looking into financial irregularities involving Granada and Udinese. And I can't read the next sentence because that's not cool, but the irregularities show unaccounted for various transactions, blah, 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 lots of money. Where did that go? That's confusing. What's happening here? I can't say it out loud. But nothing ever came of it, guys. There was also a situation in 2016 with an infamous bank letter, which is okay to talk about, which was supposed to prove, I suppose it's a bit like proving to your bank when you get a mortgage that you've got an income. It was supposed to prove that Gino Pozzo, who was the son of Gianpaolo Pozzo, had the funding to be able to take over the club from his dad. And so I guess this is one of the sort of checks and balances of the Football League before they allow an owner to come in.
Yeah.
And it was found a couple of years after it had been submitted and accepted that the bank letter from HSBC, and I say that in air quotes for anyone not watching the video, was a fraud. And they didn't even bank with HSBC; they banked with another bank, and the letter was forged from a department that don't even deal with that sort of thing anyway. So I don't know how it went unnoticed for 2 years. They were fined £4 million, I think, for that. Nothing else came of it, as far as I'm aware, and Gino Pozzo is still heavily involved in the club. There's a few more things as well. The family have been under tax inspection in the past. Gianpaolo was banned as... Sorry, you might need to take over for this one from in the 90s, Seb.
So there was a incident... There's a phone call in the mid-90s which was recorded between him and the then president of Lazio. And it was the implication was that there was a match-fixing agreement between the two of them. And so he was banned from being a president. You can still own clubs.
Right.
My voice has gone already.
We started too early.
It's only 9:15. He was banned from being a president, but he can still own clubs.
Right, due to alleged involvement in match fixing.
Alleged. I mean, in the big book of Italian match fixing incidents of that period, it's a fairly minor.
Sure,
but yes, it did happen.
Okay, so
something to read about rather than me to sort of clumsily talk my way through or into a big hole somehow. But yeah,
of course, the other stuff about Watford, and this is something I was aware of, although I didn't really understand. I didn't understand the structure behind it. But there were not so much today, we should stress, but in the past, pre-2016 mainly, there were lots of loan signings between the 3 clubs that were owned. And, I suppose one way of looking at that situation is it was very beneficial to the clubs involved because it enabled particularly Watford to, potentially excel up the league in a way that they may not have otherwise. So yeah, I mean, look, let's round that off, which unfortunately, as we said, is a lot of stuff which will be difficult to talk about for 2 reasons. One, I don't think anyone here is an expert.
No.
2, it's shaky legal ground, and I'd be worried about saying something that we shouldn't.
Well, also, my perception of Watford is wholly positive, really, and so I mean, when I mention this stuff, this isn't going to be a kind of a precursor to a.
It's not a takedown.
Exactly. We're not damning the neophytes. We're just.
It's just quite funny.
It's just interesting, and it's also kind of. And it's right to stress it also.
No one appears to have been hurt.
Well, and also given what football is, and in the context of football, this is fairly unremarkable stuff.
Sure.
And that's sad.
If a bit unusual.
It's unusual. It's notable. We have to mention it, but we're not. This is not in any way going to be an attack on Watford.
No, well, in fact, my strange paragraph ends by saying that Gino Pozzo apparently lives in Watford and is heavily involved in the running of the club. Do you know the extent of his involvement? Because we do see with other clubs in the Premier League that there is a bit of a disparity between teams who have an invested, engaged owner and those who don't. Stan Kroenke, for example, or
Silent Stan. Yeah, well, no, I mean, I know anecdotally about it. I mean, he is reportedly at Watford's Colney training ground most days. He works from there. Right. He is an active part of the scouting model. So I'm sure we're going to talk about that in more detail. But at the top of Watford's scouting system sits a kind of I suppose three elders. So you've got Scott Duxbury, who's the chairman and chief executive. You've got Gino Pozzo himself, and you've got a Santiago Giraldo, who's I suppose I'm not quite sure what his job title is, but he's essentially a head scout, head of. He's like a technical director. He used to work for Brescia before he came to Watford/Udinese. So he's very involved, and also, another thing we'll probably discuss a lot is that when the Pozzo family bought into Watford, the accusation was, right, well, like a lot of other investors from overseas, they're going to trample over the native culture and disregard everything from Watford's past and use it for their own means. And that's really not the case. There's a sort of there's a real determination, and it's evident when you go there. There's a real determination to preserve the past and to look after the memories forged during that period. So sort of it was the Pozzo family who commissioned the Graham Taylor statue, which sits outside Vicarage Road now. If you go into the new stand, the redeveloped stand, there are pictures of Elton John absolutely everywhere. I mean, it's named after him, of course, but it's sort of, there is no sense that this is a kind of, right, well, there's no BC AD crossover at Watford where
the Michael Jackson statue hasn't been brought down
with Fulham.
No, I just I'm using that as a metaphor.
Figuratively, no, it's there's nothing like that, and it's it's absolutely one of my favourite clubs to visit because of that. So he's very involved.
Well, fill me in then. Let's go back a few years, and talk about the earlier situation when Granada was still part of the cluster, which the Pozzos family have moved on from now. They've sold Granada. But there were quite a lot of loan moves between the three clubs, particularly from Udinese to Watford.
Yep.
And it got to such an extent that the Football League stepped in at one point, didn't they, and changed the rules.
Yeah, there's something, the actual technique, forgive me, that aspect of it I don't know an awful lot about. But while it's kind of seen as whenever that sort of situation exists, when you've got sort of three clubs and this flow of talent between them, it's always portrayed as like an almost unfair advantage. But Watford, there's anyone interested would do well to actually read the extract from Michael Calvin's latest book, State of Play, in which he sits down with Scott Duxbury and they talk about the mentality behind these things. And one thing's, I mean, Duxbury comes across quite well. There are moments when he's quite aggressive with sort of his attack on kind of traditional footballing ideals. So the value of an academy, for instance, and long-term legacy and management, that kind of stuff. He doesn't really believe in that. What he says is he's very astute in recognising Watford's place in the food chain, and that kind of applies equally to Udinese and Granada. I mean, they weren't all at the same level, but none of them would be considered sort of apex predators by any means in their own leagues. And so I think what the one of the aims was kind of you you have this flow of talent, and one of the areas Duxbury sort of has always targeted, with alongside Gino Pozzo and Giraldi, is South America. When you bring a South American player into mainland Europe, one of the problems, of course, is work permits, and the regulations are different in Spain and to how they are in England. And also, if you think about a player's sort of technical evolution from South American football, if you, for instance, someone like the best example is probably Adalberto Penaranda, who just hugely talented South American player, but has struggled for a work permit since arriving. He didn't fit the sort of the international criteria. He didn't quite play enough games. He has now been granted one. But for someone like that, when they come over, you can identify the talent, but does that necessarily mean that Watford would sign him and then think, right, this is someone that's suitable to play in English football in the Premier League? Probably not. So one of the advantages of owning Granada was that you can have, there's a sort of soft landing in European football, so that you put a player from South America in an environment where he speaks the language. There's less of a cultural adjustment for him. It's easier for his family, potentially. There are all kinds of benefits. It's not just... I think one of the...
We know this about Portugal as well, as a prime location for Brazilian talent coming in.
Absolutely. And for all the same reasons, too. And it makes a lot of sense. And also, it makes a lot of sense when you're in the position that Watford occupy, which is you cannot spend huge amounts of money. They're not an elite club financially, and they probably never will be. But these are the kind of little advantages that you can get. So one of the issues that sort of a Manchester United, Manchester City subject themselves to is wastage. Now, if you have a network which tries to eliminate some of the inefficiencies associated with the transfer market, then that's a very effective tool in trying to close the financial gap. And that's I understand why people reject it, because it's very different. The old model of, right, manager picks player, signs player, plays for club, great. We have almost this kind of reflexive distaste for anything which is slightly different, but you have to be able to compete.
Yeah, for some reason it seems like it's sort of cheating the rules, but it's not.
No. It's not. It's sensible. It's clever. It's also, Watford scouting extends well beyond sort of the traditional boundaries, but also it's not just about players. Like the managers that they appoint have all been recommended by. They have members of their scouting team who are actually designated to coaching and managerial, to acquiring knowledge about sort of people working in the industry. And so when new candidates are interviewed, they sort of that's a little triumvirate at the top of the system are able to look at sort of video recordings of coaching sessions, and they've got a big bank of like previous games which have been coached and stuff. So it's a smart organisation, and I think that's how you have to be. And like the stuff that we open by talking about in sort of football's context of blundering chairman, throwing money. I mean, is it that ugly? I mean, is it that compared to something like, I don't know, West Ham?
Sure.
Where it's just sort of, an agent says that his player's quite good, we'll go and sign him. And sort of the impression is of a club that just that are a little bit naive, whereas Watford are completely opposite.
If it's clever, I think it sometimes appears as insidious. And let's be clear, we're not saying anything that's right.
No.
But I take your point. I mean, I think if as we said, if there's something slightly more intelligent about the wrongdoing, suddenly it seems a lot more sinister.
Well, wrongdoing. I mean, wrongdoing.
Now you're verging on the.
Yeah. Well,
I'm just saying that generally. I'm not saying that specifically.
Oh,
you were
talking.
I'm saying if someone generally does something wrong, but they do it in a clever way, it appears to be more sort of premeditated. Not that this relates to Watford.
No,
I'm not saying this relates to Watford. I'm just saying Watford and that in the same sentence.
As your attorney, I'm sure.
Strangely, the more times he says I'm not referring to Watford, the more it seems that he kind of is.
Yeah. Just to be clear, though,
there's no wrongdoing. It's a I mean, this is a post Der Spiegel revelation world. So everything.
You seem so cynical all of a sudden, Seb. This is a different side of you.
Honestly, I have great admiration for what Watford are doing. Their scouting system is very smart. I think they have. Forgive me if this is incorrect, but I think there are 35 full-time scouts working across the world.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty developed network, and it's. I suppose the way to look at it is, so Granada have been sold to a Chinese investor, but previously don't look at it as a kind of as three different clubs. Look at it as a sort of a collection of knowledge.
Mm.
Almost like the old, like sort of the old football manager mentality when, you're building your scouting network. Look at you, Alex, you're a resident expert on that. But, you acquire knowledge in different territories. And it's just, that is a smart way to go through football now.
Yeah.
How similar do you think it is to, and potentially even, is there some kind of inspiration behind what Manchester City have started to do with the acquisition or kind of sort of controlling shares in clubs spread out? Obviously there it's much more kind of overtly branded as a Man City subset, but do you think there's something in where they've looked at the Watford model and gone, actually, it makes sense for us? I get the impression to slightly prejudge my own answer to that would be that with Man City it's more of a commercial thing.
Exactly that.
And with Watford it's more of a footballing thing.
Exactly what I was going to say.
Right,
like,
okay.
you see Watford as a footballing, as a sporting enterprise. Manchester City, by all accounts, want to turn themselves into the next Disney. Manchester. No, I don't mean that negatively, or well, not very negatively at least.
Yeah.
Like that is kind of the aim. Manchester City want to be a content provider.
Right.
Watford want to be a successful football club. And the two are very, very different. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't claim to fully understand all of the motivations behind Manchester City's network, or I wonder whether some things are done probably for the to acquire footballing knowledge, but also there are financial advantages, as we've read about, but shall not mention for fear of lawyers.
Yes.
But yeah, so exactly the same distinction that I would draw.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, we're talking. Oh, there's a hand dryer. Sorry for anyone who can hear that.
This is again another affectation. We don't like no. It's just we put that in. You've edited that into the background.
And also, hygiene is very important.
Yeah, it really is.
And that brings us to our mid-roll sponsor. So, no, there's no sponsor. But listen, we're talking about positive things at Watford, and by golly, should we?
You look so sad when you said there's no sponsor.
I am sad. Listen, if you've got a lot of money out there and you want to get a message across, I'm the guy.
Would it need to be a lot of money? I mean, just
imagine how good I'd be at sort of selling a product for someone. Yeah. I'd be great.
Yeah, we could get you we could book you into Spa in the morning before we recorded the podcast.
Exactly.
That
would be lovely. Right, tell me about the sensory room, because this is something. And don't play with the nicotine gum thing, because that's loud. Come on, it's like you've never been on a podcast before. I've done several with you. Right, tell me about the sensory room, because this is something you asked me to bring up. I'm glad you did, because it seems like a great thing. The stadium. Yeah. Will you talk us through it for people who aren't aware of what it is?
Okay, so in one of the rebuilt corners of Vicarage Road, there's a purpose-built room which is designed to accommodate children who are on the autism spectrum, so that they can have a safe environment in which to watch football. I think per match it can accommodate 6 children and their families.
Right.
That might have changed. But I think one of the reasons it impresses me, beyond the obvious, because autistic children, I don't think there was much provision for them previously. Certainly the sensory room at Vicarage Road was the first of its kind in the south. But when you go there, you can kind of it's labelled when you walk into the stand by the pitch, you can look up and it fills probably, I'd say, half of one of the corners. Now football, I am cynical about football, and everywhere you look now, there is another club trying to squeeze a little bit more money out of someone by doing something. And I look at that, particularly seating space. And I look at that, and at estimate, I'd say you could probably fit another 1,500 seats in there. Maybe that's too many. I don't know, but it's certainly capacity in a ground which is really not very big. I mean, Vicarage Road holds 21,000 people. This is not sort of Old Trafford where you've already got 70,000 paying customers coming through the door. And it's just it's a lovely thing. I think it sets a tremendous example. I've never been inside. I don't want to infringe on that's it's really none of my business. But I think it's sort of football showing that sometimes it's capable of thinking about something other than finance, and being something other than greedy. And it's just, it fits the picture of Watford. I mean, when you go there, it's old school. I mean, the ground is really shoved up against its community. It's kind of, it's a little bit Goodison Park in that respect. So, you find yourself between the kind of the typical sheds that you find at the bottom of back gardens, and this sort of this black fascia, which is ultra modern. It doesn't quite fit the community. It doesn't quite fit the picture. There's something incongruous about it. But then it is like someone has grabbed a stadium and just pushed it down in the middle of a community. And I think when you see things like that, and you walk past the Graham Taylor statue, and you see all the pictures of Elton John, and you see that sort of these local pubs and shops are still being drip fed by match day football and stuff. It just works, and you think, it doesn't really fit the picture of the criticism or sort of the image which has been built of the Pozzo family, because these are initiatives which they have led, and Scott Duxbury as well deserves a lot of credit for that. And it's just one of those things that you dwell on. You walk into a stadium, and a lot of places now, especially the newly built ones, are very similar, and there's not really nothing to see. But I remember the first time I saw it being taken back by its size. I'd read about it, but I sort of naively assumed, it would just be a room somewhere which is very, very small, but it's extremely prominent. Maybe I've got a picture of it that maybe we'll put up on the Tifo on the Twitter account. But it's a lovely thing. Well done, Watford, for that.
No, it is nice. I mean, presumably, being so, Watford isn't part of London, is it? Although London appears to grow.
I got shouted at for this. So in my mind, it's North London purely because you get on the tube and you go north. Yeah. Not Hertfordshire.
It's Hertfordshire. Yes. Okay, well, one day it will be part of London.
A lot of different people have told me that.
I have two friends who I assume, how I would say live in London, but they actually live in Watford. Anyway,
okay. Lovely place.
But presumably that's massively beneficial as well, right? I mean, in terms of attracting players, I know that's not really how the club operates, but being near London, we often hear that these things are important.
Well, I would assume it is very important in attracting players, because if your target environment is South America, then you're bringing a player not only into a new footballing culture, but a city where there are plenty of other football clubs and a lot of other South American players. So it's a little bit naive to think that every Argentinian player is going to join a sort of a big Argentinian footballer WhatsApp group and they're going to go on nights out together. But
I think that probably is what happens.
Why can't Argentinian players become friends with Eric Lamela in 140 to Tottenham? That kind of stuff. So I think that's
what everyone from Colwyn Bay does in London, even if we don't like each other.
Well, you know what? There was a story about when
I'm no longer part of the group.
You've been kicked.
What did you do?
Nothing. Let's move on. But
so, as an example, when Richarlison came to Watford, obviously he's been sold now. When he came during his first season, he actually lost a lot of weight because he couldn't adapt to English food until Aurelio Gomez, who was his club captain at the time, sort of took him down to a local Brazilian food store and said, right, well, you can get everything you want here, everything that you're used to and that you know. And it's that kind of stuff which is really important. And London, there's more of that than most other places. There's there's a little support network, sort of an informal support network, but it matters. I mean, there are plenty of examples of South American players coming over to this country and who have just been allowed to drift. There's if anyone remembers Jonathan Calleri, who came over to West Ham a couple of years ago on loan. I mean, when he came over, I think I'm right in saying that West Ham didn't even have a player liaison officer at the time, and he was sort of put into a flat, and he didn't know how to do basic stuff, which would occur to most people, definitely most people who've grown up in this country, like utility bills and whatever. So you need to have a sport network, and London offers that. And so just get on the Metropolitan line and off you go.
I tell you where else offers that. There's a lovely Polish shop in Ramsgate for any Polish players wanting to move to the UK. Maybe play to Ramsgate have a football team. I assume they do.
Not a professional one, but they'll be.
That's by the by. No, you can buy tuna that it's very confusing looking. Is it tuna? I don't know that it is, but I ate it anyway. Okay, from a footballing perspective, Sarah,
you're someone with not a particularly strong immune system, so
that's true. I must be careful of what I take in. You mentioned Goodison Park before, sort of as a comparison for Vicarage Road. It's good that you did that because obviously Watford played Everton at the weekend, which is a big deal for a number of reasons. That I suppose the main one being Marco Silva. But from a footballing perspective, how have Watford excited you this season? Because they seem to have really kicked on under Javi Gracia.
Yeah, I think the biggest superficial difference, if you look at the statistics from the previous seasons when Quique Sanchez-Flores, Walter Mazzari and Marco Silva were in charge, what you notice is that there wasn't much core stability. So I think last season or the season before, there were only 2 players in the entire squad who played more than 30 Premier League games, who started more than 30 Premier League games. Now, if you look at the equivalent statistics this season, you see a sort of core of ever-presence. So Etienne Capoue, Abdullah Correa, Ben Foster, Craig Cathcart, Jose Holebas. These players are there every week. And so there's more than one factor behind this, and I think also he's a quiet manager, but Javi Gracia has done tremendous things, and I don't think we should kind of dilute his impact. But you just see symptoms of continuity there which weren't there before. They're also better, Joe. Like, they are a better side. I think they are a better organised. So they are a very, very good team, and especially at home, they are. I mean, if you look at some of the results they've had against the sort of the top 6 over the last couple of years, and one of Gracia's first games was to knock over Chelsea at Vicarage Road. They've beaten Spurs there this year. They are a very, very good team with a lot of very good players in there. And I think over time they're often accused of being quite a transient club. Players coming in, players coming out. I'm not sure I think that's a little bit outdated. There isn't. They're not each season. They're not changing 4 or 5 different players on their own side. They're not Fulham. So I think sort of their scouting system and people's kind of perceptions of it creates a sort of a slight distortion. The idea that they're gonna change manager and both centre backs, both full backs, and a midfielder every single season. It's just not really the case, or at least it's become less and less true.
Okay, Alex. Seb says that. Well, that was perfect time for you to move the table and wobble your camera. It's the first time.
I didn't move the table.
It's the first time that we've needed your camera in the whole podcast. Is it still recording? There you go. That'll be nice. Viewers will have just been treated to Alex lifting the phone back up there. And okay,
it's authenticity. That's what it is. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Please advertise with us. Alex, Seb says the team in terms of personnel is fairly consistent, which is a nice change. Is that true of the system? Because we did make a video about Watford at the beginning of the season. Are we still seeing similar trends now in terms of formation?
Yeah, pretty much.
Run us through it.
So depending on whether you kind of go for like the sort of who scored template for team formations or whatever, Watford are basically playing a kind of a narrow 4-4-2 or a 4-2-2-2.
See, that always makes me think of RB Leipzig. Am I right to do that?
I mean, RB Leipzig kind of popularised that sense with the 2 kind of deeper lying destructive midfielders, one of whom may be a sort of press-breaking midfielder that brings the ball forwards. You've then got 2 effectively wide midfielders who will drift inside. This is what happens with Watford. So the width with Watford comes a lot from the fullbacks. Holebas, who's already been mentioned, very, very good at getting forwards and crossing the ball. On the right-hand side, either Kiko Femenia, a young Spanish guy, or Daryl Janmat, who I remember as being really, really good for Newcastle a while back. And I mean, Watford is we've sort of alluded to this already. It's kind of, they are quietly very good at football. And it's the sort of thing where if you don't really pay a huge amount of attention to things that are going on outside the top 6, you wouldn't.
They're knocking at the door in 7th.
Well, yeah, and this is the point. You kind of wouldn't. Yeah, there's no massive star names there. This is a team that is functional, but in a really good way. That knows exactly what it's looking to do. That makes intelligent adjustments depending on the opposition. So where those wide midfielders will play, for example, against a team that is sitting back like Burnley when they played them at home recently, those wide midfielders were much, much higher, and you had a kind of average shape that was much more like a 2-4-4. Whereas against teams that are looking to play through the middle, they'll bring it right in, they'll congest the middle area. There's a couple of interesting things to note. The role of Deulofeu playing alongside Troy Deeney is interesting.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because they started the season with Andre Gray in the partnership with Troy Deeney. Presumably, Deulofeu offers something slightly different. What are we getting from those two players?
Yeah, well, so I mean, Gray is still coming on as a sub, and he's a good player. I remember watching him in a Brentford game a while back. I can't remember who for, and
Burnley. Was he not at Burnley?
He was. He came from Brentford to Burnley, and then Burnley onto.
That would be it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very. I mean, him and Deulofeu do some similar things. So the point is that Deeney is a sort of a focal point for Watford's out balls. Because he's a bit of a lump, right? He's very good at contesting the ball in the air, but he is also a very astute player of through balls.
Good technical footballer, Troy.
He's a really good footballer. He's not because of the way he kind of looks, and he has this big barging physical presence. He can be a bit of a shit as well. He puts his foot through people and stuff. I think that can detract from the fact that in terms of being a focal point who plays through balls to on-rushing players, he's very, very good.
So is he misunderstood a bit like Emil Heskey? Not in terms of that they're the same player, but misunderstood because of their physical size. They are assumed to be one thing, and actually they're another.
Yeah, I wouldn't say misunderstood. Maybe kind of they're pigeonholed as being one thing when actually they bring a lot more.
Right.
So what you see a lot of the time is that the ball gets played in to Deeney, who's sat back a little bit. And then Watford have players breaking forwards, and one of the things that happens is that Deulofeu will break forward, but he'll break forward out wide into the right. Watford cross from the right hand side quite a lot more than they do from the left hand side. So Deulofeu will kind of peel out, despite being nominally the one of the two strikers. And then you'll see Hughes cutting inside. You'll see late runs coming from the left hand side, and Watford managed to create quite a lot of movement into the box. And Deeney will join that late because one of the strikers is peeled wide. And this kind of, they're not that formulaic, but it is something that you see quite often happening. And Deeney sort of knits everything together in that central spot.
It's interesting. One of the things I'll say is that I've watched Burnley in person 4 times, Watford in person 4 times this season, and each time they've been different. Which is really interesting because you sort of you don't necessarily associate squads of that size with having that much variation. So I saw them against Spurs at Vicarage Road when they won 2-1, and lovely day. It was right at the end of summer, and Elton John was there, and they had this big stirring comeback, and they won with 2 set piece goals, which kind of portrays them as one thing. I saw them beat Wolves at Molineux 2-0. I can't remember which month that was in, but they were so astute. It wasn't a big barging performance. It was just 2 great goals. Capoue scored from range, with a shot which would have killed someone if the net wasn't there, I think.
You could say he hit it like a rocket, man.
Very nice.
There we go.
He drafted that last night, and just hoping that I would
Seconds ago, mate. Seconds ago. I mean, it's poor. I do apologise. Yeah.
And then Pereira carved in a lovely outside of the left shot 1-on-1, but they were just so controlling. Like Wolves at home up until that point had been absolutely brilliant to watch. They were kind of incendiary side with so much movement from their wing backs, and Watford just shut the whole thing down. The wing backs were non-factors in the game, and then I saw them lose to Chelsea and draw with Burnley, and in their not so successful, but there were different facets of the game, like Pereira's Beckham Scholes goal that sort of came from the corner, for instance, and they drew 0-0 with Burnley, but they created enough chances to win that game, and there's sort of intricate football there, and it's just you see the different size to a football team, and it speaks very highly of their manager, of course, but it's just interesting.
This is what I like about Watford, because I think like you say, there's definitely a greater degree of consistency and selection.
Yeah.
And in terms of things that correlate with success in sport. Cohesion is one of the biggest ones. You know, if you can build particular partnerships,
little combinations throughout the
right,
pitch.
and,
Yes,
and to
absolutely.
me, particularly, you know, that sort of defensive. You know, two central defenders, two central midfielders. That is obviously your spine.
Yeah.
And it is interesting to see. I mean, Doucouré we've known about as being a really good player for a while, but Capoue was somebody who I thought when Spurs signed him from Toulouse that he would go on and be really impressive, and it didn't happen for him there. But he's coming back into it now, and so.
But those first few weeks with Capoue at Watford were incredible, weren't they? I mean, he scored like 4 goals in his first 3 games.
Well, I mean,
I may have misremembered that, but he was a big factor.
He was definitely the league's leading scorer from midfield for quite
He was a
some
fancy
time.
football steal for a couple of months.
Yeah.
After that. I mean, people bore
But I
on
think-
about that quite a lot.
I think what it does is if you have that consistency in selection, and you have an overall game plan that is, you know, there's pressing there, there's a degree of verticality looking out into the wide spaces where the fullbacks will push up.
It's where Delafeu is probably most useful, I'd say.
Right,
Yeah.
Cathcart hangs back a little bit more because, you know, that one of Gracia's problems in previous instantiations, particularly at Malaga, was getting caught out on the counter because of the pressing. So, you know, he's made these adjustments. Once you've got that basic template there, that's when you start to be able to tweak things and to cleverly adjust to your opposition what they're doing, and then to be able to kind of create moments that will work against specific teams because you know what you're doing as a kind of general basis. And I think teams that are, I don't want to say overachieve because that's always quite pejorative to teams like Watford, but you know, if you were to look at squad, for example, you'd say that there aren't many differences between Watford and probably 5-6 other teams.
No.
Where the difference comes is the consistency of approach from the manager, and that sense that you know what you're getting as a basic game plan. You know, compare that with what Mark Hughes was doing at Southampton, where, you know, the squad on paper, Watford are a bit better, but not massively.
You know what, I'd say Everton are the best. Ironically,
Everton are good.
Everton
example
are
of it as well.
the best example. It's just like there's, you know, you change your manager so often. Your transfer policy is all over the place.
Yeah, well, there's
Under
no
different
game
sports.
plan at
No,
Everton
I
at
have
all.
no idea what's going on at Everton. We should do that, and it'll just be us sort of looking confused for an hour and a half.
We should do something on Everton's set, or Marco Silva's set pieces. I saw a really good stat over the weekend about how the 3 teams in Premier League history who have conceded the most goals from set pieces are Marco Silva's Everton, Marco Silva's Watford, and Marco Silva's Hull.
Oh dear.
I'd say we should probably do that one sooner rather than later.
I mean, that
thought.
yes, I suspect that.
Okay. Hey, here's 2 Watford-related questions for you. They've both sort of come up in what you've both been saying. Now, the first one is about their defence, and so one of the I was reading an article in the Guardian, albeit from November, I think, but it was talking about the difference under Javi Gracia compared to Marco Silva. The article said that statistically speaking, Watford had maintained their attacking output. They were still making the same numbers of shots. They were still converting the same number, and that was all very impressive and very, very positive. The positive change that had come under Gracia was in defence, right? And so we've talked already a little bit about how the team are playing quite close together on the pitch and making it difficult, dependent upon the opponent. I'm going to throw the second one in there as well because it relates to it. And I was thinking about this, you know, teams like Manchester City have already come up in this conversation where you have a coach or a manager who appears to want to instill one particular style or formation or system or whatever we want to call it. At Watford, they're obviously, I mean, they're 7th in the league right now. They're obviously very, very good. They have a very good first team. They're a very good squad. And I hesitate to kind of use the sort of football manager thing, but where does Javi Gracia, for example, at Watford's success line up between? Is it systematic? Is it team? Can we say that the positive work they've done this season is as a result of the system that is being instilled there, or is it kind of more to do with the fact that the system that has been instilled suits the players that they already have? I know it's a difficult question to answer.
I mean, I think
the 2 of those have a go.
So when over the summer when Richarlison and Andre Carrillo left, and Carrillo went off to Al Hilal in Saudi Arabia, and Richarlison obviously to Everton, they lost 2 kind of much more natural wide players, and I think there was possibly a sense that Gracia was sort of struggling to accommodate or it would have been a struggle to accommodate those players within his preferred system. He certainly used a very similar kind of setup at Watford as he did at Malaga, and in Hughes and Pereira particularly, you've got I can hear you.
Seb's fiddling with it. What is that? Nicotine gum?
I'm on this straight now. They're nicotine lozenges.
How long have you been? How long have you been using nicotine lozenges?
Longer than I care to admit.
Fair enough, Alex. Continue.
So, Will Hughes, who I've always really, really rated, and Pereira, who seemed like a steal when they signed him, I think from Juventus, where he was a squad player. You want to accommodate those kinds of players because they have a game-changing quality in terms of their creativity, but you don't want to sacrifice the defensive solidity and particularly the drive that Doucouré gives you. So it seemed almost that by losing players who kind of seemed like they would be very successful to most teams, it actually strengthened Watford's attempt to play a Gracia system. I don't think their squad is amazing, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but the centre backs, Cathcart, Mariappa, Miguel Britos, they're good, solid players. But
Prodl's still there.
Prodl is still there. Yeah.
Probably he must be 33, 34 by now.
I don't know, but I can tell you quite quickly.
I don't know. He's
31.
He's only 31.
But these are not, I would suggest, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but they're not top class players. They're not the sort of players who, for example, bigger clubs in the Premier League or in Europe are being linked with to acquire or anything. So I think this is much more about what Gracia has instilled as a set of principles and being given a certain degree of time to work through them, being given support in terms of the infrastructure around him that Seb's talked about, and having players that are playing to their capacity and are enjoying that.
There's a really interesting Javi Gracia story, which I always think about whenever I watch Watford, in that he... I think when he was managing Almeria in the Segunda League, in the level below La Liga, and he took them up and got them promoted, and then resigned because I think his club's president wanted to replace the entire, or almost the entire first team with a sort of a new batch of La Liga blooded players, and he refused. He was like, I'm loyal to the players that took me here. They deserve a chance at that level. And he left in protest. It's very interesting. He seems to kind of... because if you look at his career, you see what looks like a very transient figure. Someone that's had, I think, 10 different jobs in the last decade. But actually, kind of, this is someone that breeds a sort of degree of loyalty and continuity and forges a relationship with players, which is perhaps something that Watford haven't had, in the past with kind of managers who came who you thought, as capable as they were and whatever they may have achieved in the past, you thought, you're not going to be here for very long. I remember thinking that about Marco Silva. And I'm as guilty as anybody of overestimating Marco Silva. I mean, the articles are out there to prove it if anyone wants to search them. But in him, you see someone clearly who always seems to have an eye on his next move. If you're during your first season at a club, you're able to have your head turned by no disrespect, but a club of Everton's size. That's quite telling. Like Everton, a big club, a great tradition, all that kind of stuff. However, is it a job that you would walk out on a Watford for at the moment? Probably not. It speaks to his personality a little bit. And I think Gracia is he doesn't come across like that. He's not a personality. At least not in press conferences. He's quiet. He's dignified. He'll talk in detail. He'll answer questions properly, and then he leaves. He doesn't look to try and leave an impression with the media, which is quite interesting in this day and age. Quite unusual.
His playing career, he was like a very functional, tough defensive midfielder out of the Basque Country, and played with Athletic Bilbao, but also played with Real Sociedad. Yeah. And I do sometimes feel like, this is nothing about the fact that you would need to be a footballer to be a head coach or anything like that, but I think you can sometimes read into what a player was like in their career and where they come from as them being indicative of how they're going to go into management and how they're going to carry themselves. And this is not a flash guy. No. This is not somebody who's looking to make headlines or do anything of
Clearly
that nature.
not,
I think
no.
what he's looking to do is, I sort of get the sense, because the Ruben Kazan thing didn't work out for him. So
I don't blame him for that. I mean,
no, and I don't think anyone else does.
I mean, it's quite revealing that he said that he would. I read an interview with him last night actually when he was from, I think, 2016, 17, when he was saying, you know, I'll go anywhere in the world, but I'm not going to. He was respectful. He said, I'm not going to go back to Russia. The weather was a problem for him. The food wasn't. And Russian football, you know,
it's very up and down, isn't it?
There you go.
The investments goes in, they come out, but
same with Greek football as well. When he was there
for a couple
basket
of
case league,
two different clubs. But I think with Malaga, he had the opportunity to build some stuff. Obviously, there was some oddities around injections of cash into that club as well. But I think Watford, to him, is an opportunity to reapply the principles that he was developing successfully at Malaga, and to have a sort of an investment in the progression of a team, because I think that's what he wanted to do with Malaga. I think if things hadn't gone awry there, he would have continued to do that. And Watford's now his chance to. That's part of why I don't think he's looking to kind of pop off elsewhere, because there's a sense of progression that he's enjoying what he's doing, and you can see that the team are buying into that. So
you know what's interesting though, like Scott Duxbury is on record as saying that he believes in management in 2-year cycles. Now, Javi Gracia reached his 1-year anniversary in January, I think.
yeah.
So what happens in a year's time, in 11 months' time, if Watford continue to be where they are? Like, it is, in effect, a challenge of their operating procedure. Because Javi Gracia, he has done nothing to warrant anything other than a contract extension.
Yeah.
So what happens when you get to February 2020 and, these sort of, these principles that the club seem to believe in very strongly, how does that impact his future? It's an open question. I don't know what the answer is to it. It strikes me as.
I think you have to contextualise that as well against what do Watford see as a measure of success.
Yeah.
Because to my mind, if Watford is finishing 7th or 8th, that's a really good season.
Absolutely.
And I don't think it's particularly realistic to expect that they're going to go any higher than that without a significant kind of investment. And because of everything we've said about Gracia so far, it's unlikely that even if you gave him £80 million, he would go and buy 8 new players. That's just not his scene. So I think in those terms, you have to ask, well, are Watford going to be one of those rare clubs that actually kind of acknowledges that there is a limitation, there is a ceiling for what they're seeking to do, and that continuity and repeatedly being around the fringes of, lower European Cup competition, possibly doing well in the Cup, developing players, making a profit out of that, that's actually what qualifies success for them, or qualifies as success for them. And continuity as a manager will provide that.
Well, helpfully, there are a couple of questions from listeners now to go to that link into some of the things we've been talking about. The first two I see are from J.A. Red. Who do you think Watford need to sign to challenge for the top 6? That's probably quite hopeful, but we can go for it anyway, because the second one from Sam Hardy is, what do Watford need to prioritise going into the summer transfer window? Do they need to keep most of their squad intact, or are there positions that definitely need strengthening? Any thoughts from either of you? I mean, the top 6 thing, obviously,
Well, the one that jumps out is they've got to. I don't think it will happen, but they've got to try and keep Decore. I think he's very, very important.
Yeah.
Garcia, he's been asked about this several times this season, and his answer has always been the same. He's like, well, he's not going to be going anywhere in January, but then beyond that, there were no real guarantees. And look, he's wanted by some very, very powerful clubs. So,
well, Kostra Lebekner, sorry if I'm almost certainly pronouncing your name incorrectly, apologies, ask how important is Decore to them?
Well, that Capu Decore axis is vital. I mean, they're both very, very good players. I mean, people forget that when Capu was at Toulouse, people thought of him as a successor to Patrick Vieira. Yeah. I mean, in the same way that every player in France of that type was thought to be the successor to Patrick Vieira, but he was, and he remains a, superb one-on tackler and all that kind of stuff. So keeping Decore next to him and keeping Decore's attributes in the team is fundamentally important, because also, if they were to lose him, can they attract a player or afford a player who comes in and does the same thing, it's probably not. You're probably looking at a kind of 2 or 3 year time lag.
Yeah. Well, another question of importance here from Tifo Football YouTube channel member Jordan Anderson. Incidentally,
Good man, Jordan.
Hey,
It's actually a
Jordan.
great example of that.
thank you, Jordan. For any listeners who would like to support the podcast or support the YouTube channel or give us your money, you can become a YouTube Tifo Football channel member. I wish there was an easier way of saying that. Maybe we should come up with an acronym for it, like Richard Herring does. You know, with Rahelistipa on Richard Herring's podcast. What's that? Tifo Football YouTube channel member. That's not
I feel
enough
like this
vowels.
is something we should have thought about before we press record.
There's
rather
no
than
way
do it live.
enough vowels in that. It'd be Tafiyagaba. Anyway, if you'd like to become a Tafiyagaba, like Jordan Anderson is, you can click the join button underneath any of our videos and enjoy spending your money on us. Jordan
What are the
Anderson.
benefits of me doing that, Joe?
Well, I'm going to read out Jordan Anderson's question now. Jordan Anderson's got a cool little Subutio image next to his name, which helps me identify him as a YouTube member. And also, I read all of their questions and we answer all of them. And one of the benefits is that once a week, Alex will spend an amount of time that is not financially sensible, focusing on the tactics of a club which has been questioned by one of our members, and we will make a 10 to 15 minute long video. Again, not financially sensible thing to do, just because to show how much we love our members and how much Alex likes.
We should roll this out, like, sort of, different layer of membership is, Alex comes around to your house,
Alex comes with
watches a game with you,
tells you what to look at,
brings
on
you a
the telly.
coffee,
Yeah.
sits down with you.
Sure,
You know.
you'd like that, wouldn't you?
You know.
But we did. Who
I
did we
would.
do
I
this
actually
week?
would.
Last week?
Montreal Impact.
Montreal Impact. Of course, it's written on the wall over there, and we've got something incredibly niche coming up this week, haven't
Yes,
we?
we have. We've got a player from Norway's top tier.
Right.
And I put out a tweet saying, "Oh, we're looking at somebody so niche I'd not even heard of them." And a guy who works in the kind of stats and is previously a professional kind of scout and analyst got in touch and was like, "Who is that?" And I explained, and I watched them when they were not in a bad way, but
Sure.
I mean, he's very good. The person we're looking at.
Great.
So
Oh, well, that's exciting,
it should
isn't it?
be fun.
Sounds like raw clickbait to me, I'll be honest.
Oh, I mean, Norwegian First Division stuff. In fact,
Cynical.
apparently there's somebody in the Norwegian Second Division that's playing really well with a kind of a previous Barcelona youth coach or something. Sandefjord. So that's
Right.
That's what I'm going to be doing this afternoon.
Well, listen,
Having
again,
a look.
if you would like to advertise with us, please get in touch. But if you want to become a Tifo Football YouTube channel member, which incidentally we do need you to, because no one will advertise with us for this reason, and you want to find out more about players in the top Norwegian division, do click the join button underneath one of our videos. Anyway, we've dilly-dallied for too long. Jordan Anderson's question. It's another question of importance of players to teams. I'll throw it to both of you. Troy Deeney, who's always younger than I think he is. I think Troy Deeney's
He's
40
30.
years old. He's 30 years old.
Yeah.
And clearly he is important in a way beyond just his facility on the pitch. Am I correct in that, Seb? He's quite emblematic in a way of Watford, isn't he? I mean, he's
There's
club captain.
There's no one who enjoys a similar relationship with the crowd that Troy Deeney does, and there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, he's been very successful on the pitch, but also, Deeney is an example of something that we need more of. I mean, he went to prison as a young man. Unfortunately, got caught up in a fight. He went to prison for I think 3 months, but he's really turned his life around since then. I mean, even he's been a successful footballer, but he's also made an effort to educate himself as well. Like he's obviously reformed parts of his personality and whatever, anger management. I'm not sure of the details of the incident which got him in trouble, but I think I'm right in saying that he took a couple of GCSEs after his release from prison. When he was always he was already a professional footballer within the security of a professional footballer's contract. There's no need to do that. So I think people like that, the game will evolve, and he's he's not a local hero in the sense that he was born there. He was born in Birmingham, but he in the Midlands at least, he sets a good example of how you can recover from adversity, and he's a good character in the league as a whole. Every now and again he says something which you think, I mean, his honesty gets him into trouble occasionally. I guess sort of the
Just
example,
the Ben Foster thing.
well, it's just a few different things. Like the sort of the equaliser thing that came after they beat Arsenal a couple of seasons ago. I like it. I mean, I think it's a kind of... I like characters in the game. I don't want homogenised footballers who say nothing, who work on the basis of trying not to create sound bites. And he's just himself. And I think he's great. I think he's great.
I mean, that was also... That was effectively a tactical decision.
Yeah.
You know, he was in much the same way as you could say, oh, well, we were looking to target their left back because he's not very good at football. He was saying, you know, they have a weakness in terms of fronting up physically and the effect that has on them in terms of getting them to retreat into their shells a little bit, and we targeted that.
Absolutely. I just it's quite unusual to find a player who talks so openly about that in such terms.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I really admire.
I like it. I think he's great. Football can't have enough people like that really in it, especially now. Three-dimensional characters are good for the game, and you may not always like what Deeney says. You may not like it when he says it about your own club, and you probably don't if you're an Arsenal fan. But you know, the game is built on personality, really, and
you can go and fuck yourself.
Absolutely, you know, like you know, would you rather have? Would you rather listen to Troy Deeney speak, or would you want to hear like 5 minutes of platitudes from, you know, someone that's, you know, talking about giving 110% and all that stuff? No, give me Deeney every day of the week.
Here being the key word there, because that stuff just goes in one.
Absolutely.
The final question I'm going to take, and I'm not going to. Thank you to Clant Pax who asked this question. I'm not going to read out quite what Clant said, but Clant he refers to the fact that there were a lot of snakes, puppet snakes, flags of snakes. You know, there was a woman in the crowd at Watford at the weekend with a puppet snake that wrapped around her
What's
torso.
Puppet snake? Oh,
and
the one that you can...
then had her hand in the head of the snake.
There were also some interesting song selections, I believe, from the stadium announcer.
The thing. I kind of, you know, this passed me by at the time. I again, I will admit, as I did at the beginning, I really haven't paid that much attention to what's happening at Watford and Everton. And I'm aware that Marco Silva used to be the Watford manager. So
it's a good start.
Can you explain to me why? Is he a snake? I mean, obviously he's not a snake because he's a human being, and those are two different species. But what's the situation here? What's happening here? What's going on here with the snakes?
Is one of the great questions, Joe.
Thank you.
We got there in the end.
Are you asking why is there such animosity towards Marco Silva?
That's what I'm asking. That's what I want to know. What's with the snakes?
Well, because it's self-evident. Because, you know, halfway through a season, he started to flutter his eyelashes at Everton. They made an approach for him. It was rejected. And yet, sort of 6 months into a contract, I don't know. I find it very difficult to rationalise that kind of careerist approach. I mean, you know, he'd done good things at Hull, Marcus Silva. So in effect, he'd made a bad team less bad. I mean, they went down, and you know, they sort of had some good results, but they were more organised. They were slightly less chaotic, and I thought he was actually quite fortunate to get the Watford job. I mean, it was quite a leap of faith which brought him there. Good club, modern club. I mean, look at some of the managers. The managers he was following, like Ike Sanchez Flores and Walter Mazzari, have had longer careers. You know, they are more celebrated managers, and this was an opportunity for him. And yet, within a season, with a season after you're supported by some interesting players. Richarlison had come, and he was an interesting player to be working with. And you know, you look at some of like Nathaniel Chalobah got injured, but Will Hughes was there by that point. You had a great midfield, and all it took was kind of but come and manage Everton, and it was, I don't know. I just it changed my view of him. I mean, I'm not a Watford fan, but it changed my view of him personally, and it makes his failure at Everton, I mean, not enjoyable.
Funny.
But yeah, a little bit, because it's kind of, you know, I remember thinking, I wasn't at the Watford game on Saturday, but I remember thinking, I want Watford to win that. I find, you know, I find his approach, he's like a sort of modern politician who jumps from, he wants to be in the cabinet. He'll jump from position to position to position without ever really leaving a legacy in any of those roles. It's like that, and I find that very difficult to warm to.
Yeah.
And this is football. So the answer to your question is, he was sacked, but it felt like the sacking was almost false, because it feels in retrospect as if he could have still been a success at Watford had he had a little bit more loyalty. And now
he's basically not, apart from I'm just looking at his Wikipedia page now, apart from at Estoril, where he managed 116 games, he's not done more than a season anywhere else since.
He's got a sexy haircut, though.
He's a Michael Laudrup.
That's
really
bad.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, and he did very well at Olympiacos, but then, we could do well
everywhere
at Olympiacos.
Yeah.
Apart from that, you do kind of worry, and it does seem like, in that regard, Watford have gone from, one side of the coin to the other. Somebody who is quiet, not kind of a personality, not charismatic in the way that Marco Silva undoubtedly is. I think he is. I think he's got a certain flair to him.
Has anyone ever seen Marco Silva smile?
You doesn't need to.
You don't need to smile to be
smizes.
charismatic.
He smizes.
He kind of smoulders, and I find him
Smouldering snow.
You do some smouldering.
He's a smouldering stone.
But I don't know. I find it very difficult to warm, even when he was at Hull.
I'm not asking you to warm to him. I'm just saying
He's
that Gracia is a very different guy.
Absolutely.
And in a positive way, and that maybe part of the animosity that you saw on Saturday was actually Watford fans kind of showing off a little bit and putting it on a guy that not just abandoned them, but they feel like they've got the better end of the deal.
Well, any opportunity to wear a large fabric snake,
sure,
I would
We've
take.
all been to parties like that.
Yeah. More snakes in football.
More, and bring back the puppeteers. I missed them.
Yeah,
I do. It was nice to see the sort of independent hand movement, and the little whispering in the ear, and with the snakes. You know about the snakes?
Yeah.
So I haven't seen it. So the woman actually went. She went fully with the puppeteering.
The bottom of the snake, which it looked like just some fabric, was wrapped around her torso.
Oh, so she was essentially a snake.
She was a woman with a snake wrapped around her.
Yeah.
And then her arm was sort of like a sock puppet, and she had the snake, and it was doing this sort of thing. I think it was tremendously.
I'm not a fan of.
Not a pantomime.
I'm not a fan of homemade signs at football.
You don't like pantomime.
No, not really. But that kind of commitment to, you're not just bringing an inflatable snake to the football.
You've wrapped it around your body.
You've wrapped it around your body.
Yeah.
You've gone
over a coat.
You've gone in on it. You're committed.
Sure.
Because you can't just take that off when you think about this.
We're not called Tifo for no reason.
No.
I mean, we are, but if we weren't, it would be because of the snakes.
If we had a logical explanation for our brand name, that's what it would be.
That's what it would be.
Yeah.
Okay, right, listen, that's the end of today's podcast. I hope Watford fans and non-Watford fans enjoyed it equally. I don't know who we're talking about next week yet. I do know that we have Martino Simcic coming in, who works at Copper 90, who's a sort of expert on football ultras, and the man speaks, several languages. It's very impressive. I don't really know what an ultra is, so we've invited him in, and he's going to explain it to me and you. So do look forward to that next week. Other than that, please become a Tifo Football YouTube channel member. If you have lots of money, please advertise with us. And
I feel like you've done that one too many times.
Yeah, I know.
It's made us,
it's made us seem really desperate now, hasn't it? But
do it.
Please do it.
Do it anyway.
Please do.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. I hope you enjoy the videos for the rest of the week, and we will be back next week. Seb, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Alex, thank you.
Thank you.
Au revoir.